Maybe the Egyptians told him that, but, there's no historical basis to that.
That there is no mention of Moses in Elephantian papyri. What do you think about Prophet Moses? So how do we really know whether this is not a myth?
There's no reason to believe that that Moses was historical. Maybe Hecataeus of Abdera heard the word Moses from these Egyptian priests that he talked to.
That there was a guy called Osirset who led the Egyptians or Jews from Egypt to Judea, and some traditions also say that basically this was the description of Moses.
A priest of Seth Typhon, the god of chaos. He arose in Egypt, and he led a revolt, said that Osirset was the same as Moses. But Manetho, after he relates all that, and it all comes out of Egyptian literature, and Moses is nowhere mentioned in these stories.
So now, this is something that most people ask, and I also want to know about this. Now, what do you think about Prophet Moses? So how do we really know whether this is not a myth? Or like in your book, we can find that there is no mention of Moses in Elephantian papyri. So after all your research, what do you think about him? Is he a fictional character or a real man who really existed and led the Jews or Egyptians from Egypt to Judea?
Well, as I mentioned, the first mention of Moses appears in Hecataeus of Abdera in about 315 BC as the leader of this expedition, this colonizing expedition. Well, just for comparison purposes, Hecataeus also wrote how the god Bel-Marduk, Bel, led a colonizing expedition from Egypt to colonize Babylonia, and established their constitution and their laws and their priests and all the same things. Now, we don't really think that the god Bel-Marduk was a real historical figure. Hecataeus, maybe the Egyptians told him that, but there's no historical basis to that story or many of the other stories in his book on the history of Egypt. So there's no reason to believe that that Moses was historical. But the name Moses does sound Egyptian. Ramses, it has the element Moses in it, and there's a few other names, and Moses is thought to mean water, and so maybe Hecataeus of Abdera heard the word Moses from these Egyptian priests that he talked to, but we don't know anything more than that. He certainly doesn't appear in any earlier Egyptian writings.
Okay, so Manetho proposed that there was a guy called Osirset who led the Egyptians or Jews from Egypt to Judea, and some traditions also say that basically this was the description of Moses in his writings.
Yes, that comes from Manetho, who wrote his own book on the history of Egypt. He had two stories where Judea was colonized, not really colonized, but populated from Egypt. In the first story, the Hyksos, the shepherd kings, were expelled by the Egyptians. They were, they had attacked all the gods of Egypt. They brought plagues on the land, They were expelled into Judea, and they built Jerusalem and its temple, and they were the original inhabitants. Then later, in the time of Amenophis and Ramses, there was a priest of Seth Typhon, the god of chaos. He arose in Egypt, and he led a revolt. And he brought the Hyksos back in, and he had his reign of terror. And eventually the Egyptians expelled him into Judea as well. And that's who Osarseph was. And these were two Egyptian stories. It's part of the Egyptians believed that periodically the forces of evil came from Syria or the north, invaded Egypt, and then they had to be expelled with all sorts of rituals and things. And that happened at least 3 times. And, it's just a regular event. And that this god Seth Typhon, this chaotic god of destruction, was the Syrian god that kept on invading Egypt, basically. And Osarseph is part of that Egyptian literary tradition. But Manetho, after he relates all that, and it all comes out of Egyptian literature, and Moses is nowhere mentioned in these stories, he remarks offhand that some people in his day said that Osarseph was the same as Moses. So that wasn't part of the Egyptian story, but some people, they hated the Jews. They thought that the Jewish god was Seth Typhon, this god of confusion and chaos, and they were willing to identify Moses that they had read about in Hecataeus of Abdera. They said that guy who colonized Judea, he's the same as this evil Osarseph guy. So the original story was not written about Moses. The original story is a native Egyptian tale that is not indebted to the Bible in any way. But Egypt was the home of anti-Semitism, and they were willing to identify the Jewish God with their God of confusion and destruction, and they slandered the Jews in various ways. And this was one example. But no, the Egyptians didn't write about Moses as Osarseph. That was just kind of an afterthought, kind of like where they said the goddess of Athena, that's the same as the god Neith. And this Greek god is that Egyptian god, and so on and so forth. They said, well, this Egyptian bad guy, Osarseph, he's the same as this Jewish bad guy, in our opinion, Moses. So they just kind of drew a linkage, but that was just an afterthought, basically. Nothing historical or ancient to it.